Good morning, dearest friends. Today is the 3rd of January, 2022. But equally as important, today is Rosh Chodesh. So we're starting a new chapter, no matter who you ask and no matter how you slice it. And we also are starting a new chapter, chapter 11. Perek. Yeah, I know we're gonna have a good time with this chapter 11 business. But chapter 11 of Masechah Shabbos, a new topic, a new subject. We've put all the past behind us, and we start off with some very interesting discussions about carrying, throwing, which will compel us to dig down to the essential building blocks of the malachis of carrying on Shabbos, its origin, what it is coming to reflect in the Mishkan and the like. So we will have an exhaustive discussion, which will hopefully leave us much more illuminated and informed about the malacha of carrying and the offshoot of the malacha of carrying, or Haitzah, namely Hoshata, passing, and Zrika, throwing. But first, just for a moment, I'm going to hit mute all. Of course, we always hope everyone will share their wisdom with us. And we do welcome Reb Beryl on the line. We are dedicating our learning for the well-being, health, and good circumstances of the dear members of their Chapura and their households. And we'll mention some names that have been passed on. If I'm forgetting a name or I have a faulty list, you'll please correct me. Leah Basrita, Malka Basrivka, Chaim Baruch Eliezer Ben Rusia Esther, Admila Basrada, and all of Klal Yisrael, and all of our dear members, good health, protection, happiness, and good circumstances. And so that's where we're at. So we started the Mishnah on Friday, and again yesterday we had a bris, and so I had to send out that message that we canceled. If anyone didn't get the message, I'm sorry. And actually, I have another. Before we start, I should say my brother Mendy in California had a baby boy, first baby boy, and the bris will be tomorrow, Be'ezer Hashem, and I intend, as long as the airline does not cancel me, which is probably at 50%. They do 50%, they don't, what I'm hearing. But if the airline doesn't cancel my flight, I will be, I haven't even figured out the all the time changes, but I don't, basically, I'm going to have to cancel tomorrow as well for a bris. And so please don't get too comfortable with canceled shiurim, because I don't want to get too comfortable with canceled shiurim, because we need to keep this going. But it's but Be'ezer Hashem, if my flight is canceled, which again is not a small chance, I will send ample notice and then we will resume. But assuming I'm in the air, well, then there won't be a shiur. So that's tomorrow's schedule. And why don't we dedicate today's learning also to Schus, this new baby, and his parents. They're good people, and I have a little bit of a bias towards them. So that's that. And with that, let us share the screen. Let us get started. And again, thank you all for being along for the ride. Again, we are starting chapter 11, Perek 11 of Masechah Shabbos. And again here. So what's interesting is sometimes there are things that we take for granted, and then there are things that capture our attention. And then once our attention is caught, we are compelled to really go back and re-examine everything we thought we know. And I believe that's kind of what's going to happen in the course. Well, that's what happens in the Gemara, and that's what I believe we're going to witness. So I'm going to go through the Mishnah again fast. The Mishnah leaves us with plenty of questions, because the Mishnah is, it's more specific than other Mishnahs, but a lot of ideas are yet somewhat vague and need to be developed. And so I just want to acknowledge that on the outset. And I'm going to rush through it, and then the Gemara will give us a little bit more of a step-by-step introduction over here. So again, we've talked about Haitzah, the very first Mishnah, the very first chapter, Masechah Shabbos, talks about carrying. You might recall, a person stands inside, a person stands outside, he hands here, they hand there, who takes it, who puts it. And we also know that carrying has essentially 2 or maybe 3 components. Haitzah entails akira, picking it up, removing it from its old space, moving it to whatever the distance is, and then hanacha, placing it down. So picking it up, the movement, and then placing it down. That is the textbook, taking something from point A to point B on Shabbos. That's also has a lot to discuss, and that is discussed at length. But now we're going to talk about hazoyrek, if one throws something. So what's the difference between zrika, throwing, and hoitza'a, old-fashioned carrying? Well, for starters, when you carry something, you usher the item throughout the process from point A to point B. Whereas zoyrek, there's really a single action. In that action, you are setting up for all the steps that are to follow, but it's in a single moment. And so it certainly warrants its own word and deserves its own discussion. And similarly, for what we're going to describe as certainly what we're going to describe later on as passing, hamoishit, that too is very different than an old-fashioned conventional act of things. Anyways, back to the mission. If a person throws something from one domain, the private domain, to the public domain. So you're standing in your house, let's say, and you throw it onto Ocean Drive. Assuming Ocean Drive was a Rosh Hashanah. Or if you throw something from the public domain into the private domain, both those circumstances, chayiv, one is chayiv. So what does the Mishnah teach us? That for some reason, throwing is a prohibited act on Shabbos. To cause an item to move, even if it's not in your hand throughout the duration of its travels, it is, you are chayiv. This is desecrating Shabbos, this is a malach. Now where it gets more complicated, in Rishus HaYachid, you pass something, you throw something from a private domain to another private domain. As the Mishnah is going to elaborate, imagine a series of balconies. But in between point A and point B, there's a public domain. Rabbi Kiva says you're chayiv because you've caused your item to be transported from a private domain into a public domain and into another private domain. There's more to it than that. And let's not even elaborate now. Suffice it to say, Rabbi Kiva views this as a malacha, it is your chayiv. Excuse me. The chacham poitrim, because the real reason is not what I just said. The real reason gets to go more to the essential story of how moving items worked in the Mishkan. Chacham poitrim. The chachamim say, you know what? You throw something from a private domain to another private domain, even though there may be public domain in the middle. The example we gave, I may want to throw something from my apartment to Mark's apartment or to the professor's apartment. Now, granted, my arm cannot do that, regretfully, but assuming that I could, that might be able to be a scenario that we would imagine would be Rishus HaYachid via Rishus HaRabim to another Rishus HaYachid. Again, the empty lot for Rishus HaYachid. But imagine if it was a
public path.
You're saying with Alan, there's more likely that we actually have a Rishus HaRabim B'Emtza. That could be. It's not. By the way, it's not certain that path would come anywhere close to Rishus. Yes, doctor.
The more practical example is a ball goes from the tennis court in your condo to the pool deck in our condo. Can you throw it back? Because that's not a very even. You, our young rabbi quarterback friend, can make that 20-yard pass with a Spalding tennis ball. So okay, that is a viable option. Yeah.
Okay, the doctor has indeed raised a better scenario. A ball from the tennis court, from the Malaga to the pool deck of the La Mer. It's doable. It can be done. I'm trying to think if has it happened? I don't think it's happened. The fence. It has happened.
Dover Shalokayam does the tennis.
Doctor, if I was going to try to play tennis, I would tell everybody on the La Mer pool deck to duck. But all right. Suffice it to say, Rabbi Akiva would say that to throw back. So Dr. Hammer, what happened is imagine I hit the ball out of the park, wrong sport, and it lands on the pool deck, and you want to throw it back. So Rabbi Akiva says, no, you can't do that. The Chachamim say this would not be a scenario of of Chila Shabbos. This would not be a scenario of a malacha. You still shouldn't do it, but it wouldn't be that level. Rebero.
Rabbi, can I ask a silly question? How do we deal with if you're in the ocean and you do all these things? It's exactly the same rules.
Good shaila. I'm gonna punt on it for now, but it's a good shaila. We need to discuss what the din, what the halacha is of water, and but good luck trying to carry. Well, anyways, okay, we'll talk about it. But,
No, the example of the tennis ball. If you're in the ocean, is it any different if the same thing happened on land?
You want to know if you could play? You want to know if you could play catch? Play some kind of ball, polo or something in the ocean. It's a good shaila, but I'm gonna punt on it for now. With Hashem's help, we'll get there. Punt. You saw I was medayik. Okay. So this is the essential teaching of the Mishnah. Ketzad, the Mishnah wants to give us some specifics. So you have two balconies that face each other on two opposite sides of a Rishus Harabim. So this doesn't show you the other side, but this is a reconstructed. You see my screen, right? This is a reconstructed balcony from Pompeii. This is printed in the Steinsaltz Gemara, the new one. Although you'll notice I have the smaller version, which is black and white. I have a feeling the larger edition is actually color. Suffice it to say, what you can see here is they would have a series of protruding posts, which I believe that's the actual word gizutra. Gizutra really means these beams that protrude from the roofs, and they turned it into a balcony. So imagine where the guy who took the picture was standing, there was another balcony facing it. Hold on. Tell me because
you should rotate.
Can you see the screen right now? Do you see the picture with the?
Can you turn it around? It's.
Hold on. So you're seeing the wrong screen.
You gotta turn your head.
Maybe the guys are laying down.
Yeah.
I'm gonna share my screen. So now tell me, can you see the picture?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
So this looks like it's in Yerushalayim.
Oh yeah.
Well, except for I don't know, the background's a little bit too underdeveloped to be Jerusalem. But okay.
Back in the
day. So this is probably May Yesharim 1903, before all of what was away from the city was developed. And so you have two balconies. I'm not sure that you're gonna have a hard time catching something if you're holding a broom in your hand. But no, okay. So what's happening here is the picture is showing him throwing a broom. And you can imagine this could have actually happened. They're very tight, and there's a road, the street. This is Mei Sharim. This is one of the very big, tight, but big thoroughfares, or Rishus Harabim, let's say, for argument's sake.
It's also a long broom.
That's a long broom. And so he's throwing the...
the buildings are that close together.
You don't understand, Rabbi. This is the beginning of stickball. They started to play stickball.
They had the cameras out, they capture the, yeah. So here we have a picture of a...
Seems to be above 10 Sefakim.
Yes. This is an important question, Professor, you bring up. We have to pretend we're not aware of this issue just for the moment.
Okay.
But it's a good point, and it isn't made. I believe Taisus makes it, and perhaps it comes in the Gemara as well. So it's a good point. But just for argument's sake, we want to visualize two balconies. By the way, you'll notice here the artist didn't show us those protruding beams. But anyways, they're both standing in their balconies, and this man throws the broom to the other guy. I imagine in real life there probably was a little more space between the two balconies. The artist wanted to squeeze two frames into one picture, so they squished them together. And I think in the tenements on the upper, what is it, on the Lower East Side, I have a feeling they probably also had such dynamics. So anyway, so they're throwing something. So here is Zoreh. Two balconies across each other with a public domain running down the middle. Just while we're at it, this is Moshit. One is he's passing the item, which is probably the wiser solution with such close distance. And here he's Zorek, he's throwing the broom. Now, if we had a lawyer on our chat, they would think about the liability of if the broom fell down and someone was underneath it. But we don't have any lawyers on this chat, I don't think. So So we'll just think about the mechanics and the practical ramifications as opposed to the liability. All right, so back to the Gemara for a moment.
What happens if they miss?
That's a problem. That's a problem. But that's for the lawyers.
The problem for
figure
the
out.
pedestrians.
Yeah. You don't want to be a pedestrian with someone passing a broom over your head. All right, so Ketzad, two facing balconies, they face each other, and in the middle, underneath them runs a public domain. The professor has a very good point, which is we need to figure out why and if and how this airspace of the Rishus Harabim should extend so high. Didn't we say that it has a fairly limited airspace? We're going to get there. So Hamoishit, Vihazoirek, the two pictures that we looked at. If you throw it or you passed it, mizu lazu, from one to the other, pator, one is exempt from passing it in this manner. Let's take a look at Rashi. Ketzad shtei gizutros. What's the Mishnah accomplishing here? So Rashi says, Rabbanon ka'amri luhu. We are elaborating on the opinion of the Chachamim who say that you're allowed to you're allowed to throw from one private domain to the other. And so we are giving the visualization in the Mishnah of two balconies. Rashi, gizuz traot. What are gizuz traot? So Rashi says, zizin hayotzin minakoisa. The literal word gizutra means the little protruding pieces of wood or protrusion, and they would place beams on them, and it would become an extra space where people could use. Zu kenegezu. V'shnei tzidei rishus harabim, on two sides of the public domain. V'hein rishus hayachid. Why are these balconies considered a rishus hayachid? Shegivoi ha'isiyud v'rechav ha'isdalet. By virtue of their height and their width, they have all of the dimensions that make these balconies no longer public domain. They become, or they have the halachic status of a private domain. And so, pater, one is permitted to pass or throw from one balcony to the other. Rashi is going to give us some explanation. Why are you pater? We do not find that there were acts of throwing or passing Rishus hayachid or Rishus hayachid when it was going from one private domain to the other. And there was also a Rishus Harabim in between the two domains. Now Rashi is going to go in at length to describe what we are going to see in the Mishnah. So I'm going to pause here. We're not going to read the whole Rashi, but Rashi basically explains what I hope to show you in a picture, which is that the Leviim in the Mishkan transported the beams, the krushim of the Mishkan on wagons. And the wagons have the halachic classification of a private domain because of their size, their height, just like those balconies. And they were parked, if you will, in the courtyard of the Mishkan, which was, or in that region, and it was considered, the Machane, the camp of the Jewish people, is considered a public domain. And so you have, or you don't have rather, passing from one wagon to the other across the public domain. As we'll see in a moment in the rest of the Mishnah, that there was a situation where items are passed from one private domain to the other, and there it did exist in the Mishkan, and therefore one might be chayiv for doing so. So that's what the Mishnah is going to say, and then we'll read Rashi. Excuse me. B'diyuta achas. However, if both balconies were on the same side, so imagine now two condos, the same building, one next to the other. And if I were to pass something from my balcony, so Dr. Hammer, it doesn't quite work in your building, but let's say you could hand something over to the Shoshans, let's say. So you're on the same, again, I don't visualize exactly your proximity, but
different.
You're not exactly, but imagining that that wasn't the case. So you could passing it over.
Right.
So then, or we'll say Dr. Well, actually, no.
Rabbi,
Yes, Rabbi Barrow.
so if both balconies are the same lined up together, the Reshus HaYochid of the place extends to the balcony. So basically, you're going from one Reshus HaYochid to another.
Correct.
Am I missing something?
There's a Reshus HaRabim be'emsa, assuming there is a Reshus HaRabim, which is why all of the examples we
Beach
should
club,
put this
beach club.
in the
has-
beach club. But the reason why all the examples we're giving are really not great examples, because in our neighborhood, all of the buildings are part of a larger complex. And so there is no public domain running between or underneath our balconies for the most part. And so therefore, all of our examples are more for us to just visualize the alignment of the balconies as opposed to the public domain that runs underneath it. However, I'll tell you what, I've referenced in the past, I'll reference again. I had a friend whose family owned a condo on Kikar Shabbat. Kikar Shabbat is right outside of Mea Sharim. It's right in the very Haredi part of Yerushalayim. And it's an interesting place to spend the Shabbat, as you've heard. And so they had a balcony. And that balcony, and many others, did, in my estimation, literally jut out over the Kikar Shabbat, which I don't know if it had, I don't think it either has, according to most poskim, the halachic status of a public domain, but it certainly has the idea of a hustling and bustling public domain. And anyways, that's kind of what we're describing. So if they were across from one another, public domain running underneath them, like the picture we looked at, Potter, that is this picture. However, if they're side by side, I'm going to show you another picture. And so here, look, this is the same building in Mea Sharim, or maybe not Mea Sharim, assuming this is Times Square, we'll call it Times Square. And so underneath these balconies, this is all Reshus HaRabim, putting the professor's wise question on the side for a moment. And all that's a Reshus HaYachid is the balconies that have the sufficient height and dimensions. And so now they are passing from a private domain that's coming along the same row, but yet the public domain is in middle. And here our Mishnah says it's plausible. It's possible that they could be chayiv. So that's what we're about to read in the Mishnah. So again, they're b'diyuta achas, they're all on the same level. And they're passing the item from one balcony to another. Yes.
Rabbi, usually renderings are drawn to scale, okay? And it gives you an idea of how big the balcony is. But if you look at these renderings, it suggests to me clearly that each of the two owners could reach out and touch each other with something in the middle without any difficulty in terms of the amount of space that there is. If you go to the first one in particular. So that's a question.
Yeah, I mean, I have a Mishnayis that's in the shul, the illustrated Mishnayis. Yoni Gerstein, he's the artist. And as you can see from the pictures, they're very Haredi, Yerushalayim type, or Bnei Brak type images. I have it. It's just to give us a concept. I'm not sure the degree of precision. I'm assuming they have some familiarity with the Mishnah, but it's a good point. I thought you were going to make another comment, which is, and let's just make the comment without being detoured by it. But I was noticing that you'd imagine in Mea Sharim, the people doing this were probably the women, or at least there were some women involved in this picture, and I'll note the absence. And it's a big discussion, which we probably have a lot of agreement on. But anyways, it's just a resource I have, and it's what I'm sharing. I'm not endorsing the artistic skill, the halachic precision, or the philosophy of how and what they choose to include in the pictures. But just to point that out.
And what the fact that if it was more Daled Amos or more make a difference or not?
I don't know. I don't believe so. But now that we're visualizing, they're b'diyuta achas, they're in one row, they're on one side, they're side by side, if you will, and that's going to have halachic ramifications. If the two Reshus HaYachids were on the same side, or Rabbi Steinzal says the same level, which means on the same side of the Reshus HaYachid, or I'm sorry, on the same side of the Reshus HaRabim, Hamoishet Chayiv, the guy who passed, it's a little ironic. This guy would be chayiv because they're passing it. V'hazoyrek potter. But if you threw it, you were exempt. You know why? This is what the Levite job looked like in the Mishkan. What Levite job? The Mishnah explains. We might have had two wagons alongside each other on the same level, is the way Rabbi Steinsaltz is translating it. One behind the other. And they would pass the krushim, the beams, the posts of the Mishkan from one wagon to the other. They would do hayshata, so they would pass. You would never find in the Mishkan that they would throw those beams. Why wouldn't they throw those beams? Anyone want to try to take a stab at why they wouldn't throw the beams of the Mishkan?
Hektish. You wouldn't want to throw that something holy.
So I think in one moment we heard two beautiful explanations that both are brought in the commentaries. Dr. Hammer, I think you said something about being too heavy.
Yes, exactly. They're too heavy.
So Dr. Hammer says a very important and wise point. They were literally too heavy. You cannot just simply throw these heavy beams of the Mishkan. They were massive. They were heavy. And so the only thing they could do is pass them. And Mark says that they were holy and we're not going to degrade or denigrate the Kiddusha of the Mishkan by throwing them. That is also true. So for
maybe a danger of breaking them.
The third explanation that's brought is that they could be damaged in the process. And so our Chabura has accurately introduced three different reasons, all of them authentic and accurate ones, as to why we might not want to be throwing the krushim. Rashi and our Gemara, we'll see. But all of these ideas, the heaviness, damage, kedusha, these are all true explanations as to why they weren't thrown. There's something very interesting about Hayshata. It's kind of not that different. Let's post this picture again. Does this remind you of another discussion we had not long ago about carrying? And remember the discussion about two people doing a malacha together?
Right.
So passing, if you think about it, and especially if it's very heavy, inherently, for a certain considerable part of the malacha, you have two partners, two participants. And so you should think, that this might be a shnaim shasu. Two people did a malacha together.
Yeah, but each one's doing one's passing, the other's receiving. So
first of all, you might say this is maybe one of the unique facets of Hayshata, which is why it's being referenced.
The beginning of the first Mishnah, the guy with the ani of, the
right,
guy passing
right.
out.
But Mark, there's something else, which is when would two people doing a malacha still be chayiv?
When
They both
They're
need each
doing
other.
it at the same time.
And they need each other. So ostensibly, whether it's because of balance or weight or whatever, to do Hayshata by definition, you need two people. So that would be an easy reason to say that you shouldn't be exempt just by virtue of having two people involved, because they actually need each other's support. There's more to discuss, but Ezer Hashem, we will, but just wanted to point that out. Let us go back for a moment and take a peek at Rashi. Let's go back to the long Rashi, if you don't mind, if you'll indulge me. Potter, why would you be exempt for passing or throwing across the Rosh Hashanah? This doesn't exist in the Mishkan, that you throw something from a Rosh Hashanah to a Rosh Hashanah with a Rosh Hashanah in between them. This is not how the Levites served in the Beis Hamikdash. They wouldn't pass from the wagon that was parked next to them. Imagine you have two cars that are in pull-in parking. You wouldn't find them passing from one to the other. What they would have is with parallel parking, one wagon was parked behind the other wagon. And for that too, I'm going to show you a picture and then we'll go back to Rashi. Again, I don't know the precision of these images, but just so that we could visualize, my feeling is the wagons were a little bit larger than they're portrayed over here. But suffice it to say, this wagon has wheels. They invented the wheel, and it's 10 tvachim high with a with a considerable space on the inside. This is parked in front of this. They're dismantling the Mishkan. He gets the piece, he passes it here, and then they lay it across, and then so on and so forth. I would have imagined the beams were running the other direction. I would have imagined them to be, how do you call it? But anyways, suffice it to say, here is the artist's imagination of how two parallel parked wagons would be loaded up. They would pass the items from one wagon to the other, but they didn't pass it from this wagon across the way to the wagon down yonder. That was not part of how the Levites managed the Mishkan. Doctor?
Is this strong evidence that the Levium started the valet parking business?
Ooh. This is a good question.
The question.
This is a good question.
We know they got paid for their avoda, so you know.
They got tips.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they wouldn't pass it across. They would pass it from the front to the back. The family that carried the crushing was the Merari family, and they had 4 wagons. And they would park them 2 and 2. You parked them as a Mishkan when the Mishkan was dismantled, and they would place them on the wagons. They would line them up one behind the other. And they would park it with the space of Rosh Hashanah in the middle. And they did this so that they could right away start moving once the wagons were loaded. The Mishkan, and they would pass the beams to the 2 that were close to the Mishkan, and they would pass it forward. They would not pass it across the way. That would not be the way to do it. We already showed the image of the balconies on the same side in Nea Sharm. One elevation, one side of the street. But there is public domain in the middle. Hazorik Potter. Professor, are you with us? I want to show you a Rashi that you're going to like. Hazorik Potter, if you threw it, you are exempt. Hayol, for the reason as follows. He was 10 tvachim, he was more than 10 tvachim above the ground. Number 1. So Rashi gives 2 reasons. Number 1, we have the professor's issue with the height. And so therefore it's not really passing in a Rosh Hashanah because it's in the airspace that's above 10. Number 2, there was no such thing ever of throwing items from one private domain to the other. So again, let's just pull the picture up one more time. There's wagons here and there's wagons there. But there was never any throwing. Because there was never ever any throwing, therefore throwing even from this wagon to the next, or from throwing from this balcony to the next, you are exempt because there was never such an arrangement in the Mishkan. The Hamoishid Chayiv, but to pass it, you are Chayiv. Because although usually we say that higher than 10 Tvachim maybe is not a Rosh Harabim, but they would authentically transport in this manner the beams from one wagon to another, even above 10 Tvachim, with a little bit of a Rosh Hashanah in the middle. And then the Mishnah fills in and tells us what it looked like that the 2 wagons were next to each other, etc., etc. Now let's just go to the bottom of the Rashi 1 second. Avaloi Zorkim, they would not, hold on, they would not throw anything. Or they wouldn't throw these beams, these crushing. Why? She'ein oisan crushing is rakais. These crushing would not be thrown. And here Rashi says done because of their extreme weight. So Rashi here embraces Dr. Hammer's pshat. Rebberal?
Rabbi, are we to presume at the time of the Talmud, everybody agreed to every single detail of the Mishkan, that it was this way and to that detail? It's a little hard to.
So, Beryl, you're asking a good question. You're saying how on based on what did we presume the Mishkan to have this arrangement? And the
Now
Gemara
the
is gonna.
rabbis agree.
So the Gemara is gonna. Well, first of all, we didn't say all the rabbis. You don't need all the rabbis to agree. The author of the original author of the Mishnah and Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, who composes or compiles it, they agree. But the Gemara is going to ask where we would suppose that the arrangement was as it's been presented here, and the Gemara is going to give an answer based on Psukim.
Different ways to read psukim also.
Okay, could be. We're not afraid of that. But we'll see why we'll see. But the Mishnah clearly takes a position, and we'll see soon why the Mishnah takes that position.
There hasn't been agreement exactly since those times at Yom Hazeh.
Well, there's a lot of disagreements, and there's also a lot of agreements. One might make the case that for all the disagreeing that happens, there's more agreeing. Just you don't get a headline when two rabbis agreed. That's not exciting. No one's going to read the paper.
When it happens, we'll see what happens.
He's saying if it would ever happen, we'll.
Rabbi, I think that diagram was a bad diagram
Why?
as far as trying to teach how they transferred it, because the way it looks is that they didn't have to throw it over the balconies. They just had to go through the passage. There must have been a passage that joins all those balconies, an inside passage. All they had to do was just walk from one to the other.
I want to tell you something funny. The shul has a new neighbor. You know the building with the 5 floors?
Yeah.
So the bottom unit was sold, and there's a nice Israeli man who bought it. And when they were unloading the truck, I watched them pass a bunch of items from the moving truck onto the balcony. This happened just this weekend. And I was watching and I was thinking, wow, I feel like Hashem was providing us a visual of our Mishnah. Talking about Hashata, passing and throwing and moving things from a moving truck, which ostensibly, according to the criteria of our Gemara, would be considered a Rishus HaYachid, and then the balcony is a Rishus HaYachid with a balcony. So what's my point? Sometimes it's easier to pass it through the balcony than to go through the adjoining walkways. So, but anyways, it was interesting to watch the Mishnah come to life.
Was it Moshe's movers? Was it Moshe's movers?
It wasn't Moshe's movers, but it was unmarked. Unmarked.
Very unmarked people in the neighborhood.
Unmarked.
Shinbet. Yeah.
Professor, the Meiri gives us a clue to another part of your question, which you asked if it's in the airspace, it's not in Rishus Harabim. But you may recall, and we'll discuss later, but just because the Meiri brings it to our attention now, there's such a thing as kluta kamisha huncha. When something's in the air, it's as if it's on the ground. And so if it's on the ground, it means it escapes being outside of the public domain. And so suffice it to say, there are ways around the professor's question, but we'll discuss it in the Gemara with Hashem's help later. All right, now let's take a look at the Gemara. The Gemara is very interesting. So what does our Mishnah say in a nutshell? One is not allowed to throw or pass. Well, one is not allowed to throw something from a Rishus HaYachid to a Rishus Harabim, to a Rishus Harabim, to a Rishus HaYachid. It gets more complicated, and that's where the bulk of our Mishnah's discussion has gone to, is when you're throwing from one private domain to the other private domain, but there is a Rishus Harabim in the middle. And so Rabbi Kiva says you're chayiv, period. The Chachamim say you're pater. And then we discussed what exactly the scenario of Rishus Harabim and Rishus HaYachid looks like. So that was our mission. Let me ask you a question. The Chachamim say poitrim, right? Chachamim poitrim. Do they always point? So do they always say you're pater, or do they only say you're pater in one arrangement? that we'll see. The Gemara is going to discuss at length exactly how to interpret our Mishnah. Just to leave it with a little bit of a question mark. Now let's take a look at the Gemara. And the Gemara here is going to go back to Bereshis. We're going to go back to the genesis of the Malacha of carrying. So let's get started. Let's take a look. Mechdi, let's understand, let's see. Zrika, throwing, Tolda Daitsahi. The reason why you're not allowed to throw from one domain to another is because it is a spin-off. It is a Tolda, it is an offshoot, a subcategory of carrying. Or what would be a better translation of Haitza? Moving an item from one domain to another, taking out. Hotza literally is taking out. So Zrika is an offshoot, a subcategory of taking out. But Haitza Gufa Hechaksiva. How do I know that you're actually not allowed to carry on Shabbos? Imagine the Gemara asking such a sacrilegious question. How do you know you're not allowed to carry on Shabbos? So the Gemara basically is saying, let's go back to the beginning. Rashi, al korchach toli, deloy nimnis ba'avos malachos. We know that throwing is not a primary malacha, an ab malacha, because it's not listed in the list of malachas. But told that daitzahi she'in lecha she'in lecha l'si the told av acher d'me'ein daitzahi hamor ba'avos malachos. And there's no better candidate. There's nothing that's more analogous than throwing versus carrying. So how do I know that you're not allowed to carry on Shabbos? What kind of question is this? What kind of question is this? Carrying existed in the Mishkan. And we know we've said over and over and over that whatever existed in the Mishkan is a malacha. So what kind of question is Haitza Gufa Hecha Ksiva? So Taisus explains, you know why the Gemara asked this question? Although carrying was in the Mishkan, if not for a verse, a new verse, the Gemara's explanation, if not for an explicit pasuk indicating that you're not allowed to carry on Shabbos, we would suppose that you could carry. You know why? And this is Taisus is very consistent. Taisus keeps on coming back to this point. Carrying is a malacha grua, is a shvacha malacha. It's a low quality. It's not a very impressive malacha. You know why we said that carrying is a malacha grua? Who remembers? We discussed this not long ago. What's unique about carrying that makes it a karate malacha? Anyone? Rebel, you know what's wrong with carrying? What makes carrying an unimpressive malacha? So we said it's the least
generate anything. He doesn't create. It's not creative.
Not creative. It's not constructive. Every other malacha causes something to change in the matter that you're dealing with. Fire alters the molecules of the item. Weaving reconstructs and reconfigures to create something new. Cooking, planting, everything. All the malachis are changing something, making it different, making it improved. It's creative and improving. With the exception of carrying. All carrying does is moves something from point A to point B. It doesn't make the item any better per se. It doesn't contribute anything substantively to the thing itself. And so therefore, you might imagine that it doesn't even belong as a malacha. Therefore, Taisus explains, the Gemara asks the question, how do I know that carrying is a malacha? I'm Rav Yochanan says here, I'll try to tell you where we know about malacha carrying. The Amar Kra, there's a pasuk that says, this is one of the favorite psukim. Vaitzav Moshe, the favorite stories. Vaitzav Moshe vayaviru kol b'machna. What happened? Let's open it up in its original citation. Moshe Rabbeinu and the elders, those that are in charge of the Mishkan, did a fundraising campaign. And they collected materials for the Mishkan. Hold on, let's get to our pasuk. So we'll start from here. Betzalel and Aliyav, who were the two primary craftsmen who were responsible for the Mishkan, and all the experts, all the professionals, who knew all the different melachos that Hashem commanded. So Moshe calls Betzalel, Aliyav, and the crew, and they took all the materials that were given by the Jewish people. And every morning, the people kept on bringing more and more materials. And all the artisans, the wise people who did the malacha, came to Moshe. Vayomer el Moshe lemer, and they said to Moshe, Marbim ha'am lahavi, the people are bringing too much stuff, midei ha'avodah l'malacha, too much materials for the work we need to do. Asher tziva Hashem l'aseh. There's too many resources. Help us out. And v'itzav Moshe gave a command, vayaviru kol b'machana, and he sent out a tweet, or he otherwise let it be known. No one should do any more stuff for the Mishkan, no more donating. And then everyone stopped donating. So they say this is the historic moment where they made a fundraiser and they raised all that they needed, and the first time and the last time that an organization said, please stop donating. That's what happened. That's the story. The Mishkan had precise dimensions, had a precise set of materials that were needed, and they had too much materials, and so they said stop. So why did Moshe give the word to stop donating? Anyone know why Moshe said to stop donating? Well, from the pasuk, it's quite clear that it was. I'm sorry.
No place to put anything. They had everything they needed.
It was literally too much. It was too much, and so they were asked to stop. The interesting thing is the Gemara understands this pasuk very differently, as we'll see in a moment.
That's probably the last time that ever happened.
Yeah,
in a Jewish organization.
A Jewish organization put out a message: stop donating.
No, we have enough. Don't donate anymore.
Well, that's different, because in any Jewish organization, if they bring more than they expected, they will find where to apply those funds. That is, they would expand the scope of the project. Moshe didn't have this opportunity because
he didn't have the latitude.
Of the project was defined by Hashem.
Yeah.
So this is why he had to stop.
Indeed. This is true. I will tell you, as someone that's involved in the management of a shul, there is a big question, and I share this with my colleagues, other rabbis or administrators of shuls. Jews, like many other human beings, have a hard time parting with stuff. We feel guilty throwing about stuff, even stuff we don't need. Dr. Hammer, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I have a feeling that there's a higher percentage of hoarding in the Jewish people than maybe in the general population. We, especially because of all of the trauma and the different events, the Holocaust and poverty and whatever, there tends to be a lot of pain associated with getting rid of stuff, even things that aren't needed.
You have the concept of baltashlis. That's makes it an error.
And we have a value, of baltashlis, and whatever. We have Jews. We have a hard time getting rid of things. Again, I don't think it's exclusively a Jewish issue, but Jews, we definitely share, some of our people share that challenge. Many times in a household, the husband and wife don't always have the same philosophy of hoarding or not, and it could cause. So a lot of times what happens is a family doesn't want to get rid of something. They can't, it hurts them to get rid of it. They feel guilty throwing it out. So they say, oh, we'll donate it. We'll donate it to the shul. And so they call the shul and say, we have these beautiful clothing. My father wore it for 30 years, and it would be a shame to throw it out now. Can we donate it to the shul? I'm sure there's people that could use it. Now, there are needy people. So now I have a question. Do I say, listen, we don't have the storage or the infrastructure to have so I usually say, why don't you go donate it to, there's organizations that Jewish organizations that collect clothing. There's an organization in Sky Lake. There's an organization in Hollywood, Emerald Hills, and there's other, non-religious organizations. But sometimes I hear in the voice, they need to get rid of it. It's important for their therapy, and they say, "No, bring it." We'll either donate it, and sometimes we'll look at the quality of the stuff and we'll throw it out, but at least we'll help them not have to deal with the emotional pain of having to throw those items out. Or sometimes people say, "Rabbi, I inherited books, or I got an apartment and there's books. Oh, you're going to love these books." So I know that I'm not going to love those books. And I know the shul has many times no use for those books, but many times it's a single opportunity to meet children whose parents value Jewish books, and the children don't value those books. And so if someone tells me my parents passed away and they left me Jewish books, I always tell them, please bring them to the shul. We would love to add them to our library. We'd love to see them, because many times that's the only opportunity to have a Jewish connection with the children who have unfortunately little value with items. So my point is, I relate to much. There's certain materials that are too much or not helpful, and then you have to decide how and if to not receive it. Which reminds me, I know we're running out of time, but did you know that somebody who I was very close to, the husband passed away, and the wife passed away, and the child unfortunately is was estranged from the parents, and they live somewhere off in California and very distant from Yiddishkeit. They're not married Jewish, and they're totally. And she called me. The daughter called me. She said, "Listen, I'm leaving in a few hours, but I have to. We're getting rid of the apartment. We have some books. Can I donate them?" And I said, "Sure, I'll come by. I want to see you." We came by. We spoke. I told them about the parents. Tried to, give some kind of Yiddish, Jewish. And then she hands me a whole bunch of books, and that's it. I'm never going to see her again. To my shock, I get a call an hour later. Rabbi. I say, "Yes." She's like, "I need you to come back." Okay, what happened? Her father was a veteran, and he had a signed letter from General Eisenhower, and she by mistake left it in the box. So, anyways, you never know what the important things can happen. Anyways, okay.
Rabbi,
Yes.
you bring up a very important question. We have lots of things about giving charity. Are there obligations on the person receiving the charity?
Explain what you mean. The answer is yes, but explain what your question is.
Are we told specifically that one should be grateful, that one, if he makes it, should give to others? And where would we find that?
So I don't think there is so much discussion about the recipient in that sense. There's a lot of talk about organizations or individuals that are gabbai stuck, that have a responsibility for oversight and to go beyond the letter of the law in being careful about how they administer tzedakah. There's a discussion in the Gemara about a rabbi who they asked him, "What's going to be your zchus when you pass away?" He says, "One time I had my personal funds, and then someone gave a donation, and I by mistake put them in the same pocket. And even though I knew the amounts, I donated the whole thing to charity to avoid an apparent, the appearance of impropriety, or it's something to that effect." So there's a lot of, but as far as an ani receiving stuff, there's menschlichkeit. I don't know. I don't recall offhand if there's a text that says if you're a poor person.
Maybe Rabbi, maybe it's related to hakarat hatov.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's a general theme, but I'm not certain if there's like a specific text that says poor person. The poor person has to do X, Y, and Z.
When I gave stuff away and I told them I have a TV, they asked me if it was flat screen. Otherwise, they wouldn't come get it.
Right. So on one hand, to you, that sounded like, come on, that's like very petty. But the reality is that they have to find the customer for it too. Although if you hold on to anything long enough, it becomes vintage and then someone wants it. But
come back into style.
All right, so let's just finish this up. So long story short, the pasuk here, it's quite clear that the Jewish people had too much stuff, and for the first and last time, they said stop donating. However, we're going to see in our Gemara a different interpretation. How do we know about carrying? Amar Rabbi Yochanan, there's a verse that says Moshe sent out a message. His message was stop donating. Moshe Heichon Hava Yosef. Where was Moshe hanging out? Where was Moshe sitting? B'machane Levia. He was sitting in the Levite camp, which is the center of the camp. And the Levite camp and the tabernacle compound or area was a Rishus Harabim. The Ka'amar Lahu Yisrael, and this was what he was telling them. La tapiku v'taisu mirshus hayachid idchu l'rishus harabim. Cease carrying items, taking out. Tapiku is hotza in Aramaic. Stop taking out and bringing back. Carrying from a private domain, from your homes, l'rishus harabim to the Machane Levia, which is a public domain. Rashi, how is the Levite camp a public domain? Because all of the Jews would have to come visit, and so therefore it was a high volume area, and it has the halachic status of Rosh Hashanah. So the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan saying that the verse that we just read, which is clearly a question about donations, was actually not about donations at all. It had to do with carrying on Shabbos. Moshe says, don't bring anything today, because today is Shabbos, and on Shabbos you're not allowed to carry. So the Gemara asks what we're all wondering. Why does Shabbos call you? This pasuk's talking about Shabbos. Most likely, it happened in a weekday. Umishum the shlima la malacha, and the work was over. And this is a reasonable thing to suppose. We supposed it. Kidichsiv v'hamalacha ha'isodayam gomer. The pasuk itself says that the malacha was over. And so obviously, what's happening is there's too much stuff. Why are you assuming this pasuk is talking about Shabbos? So the Gemara says, because we have a little bit of a Gzera Shava of sorts. We have a special clue. Because it says, Vayaviru. The word Vayaviru is the same root as the word Havara. Havara Yom Kippur. The word Havara is connected to Yom Kippur. Just like in Kippur, you cannot do malacha, so too on Shabbos, you can't do malacha. About the Mishkan, Moshe sends out a message to the camp. And about Yom Kippur, it says that you'll proclaim, pass throughout the shofar. And so the Gemara sees this as a clue that really we're talking about Shabbos. This is a shocking interpretation. But indeed, this is part of the process the Gemara uses to identify a source that says you're not allowed to carry on Shabbos. I just want to go really fast, and then we're going to end. It's already overtime, and Rabbi Shlomo is doing Chumash today, right? And in just a minute, we'll end, and you'll do Chumash. But I want to show you, this is the Chassam Sofer. Getting a shofar. Oh.
Just practicing.
We get a shofar. You listen to me, in reference to shofar.
I heard the word shofar, so we
Givaldik. Listen, as that shofar blast sounded, you never know. We'll hear the sound of the shofar of Mashiach.
Right.
All right, let's take a fast look over here. The Chassam Sofer asked an interesting question on the pasuk that we just read. Vayaviru kol b'machana. Reish Perek HaZoyrek. Look at the very beginning of the 11th chapter of Shabbos HaZoyrek. Yalfinam b'gzera shava b'mayri b'yayim asur. The Gemara says that Vayaviru tells us that this happened on a day that you're not allowed to do malacha. V'yalfinam minei isur haitzad the Shabbos. And it's from here that we know that you're not allowed to carry on Shabbos. V'kasha, that's a little difficult. Hapashta the kramashma the varas kol haya mishum the shlima avidita. If you read the Chumash without any shtick, it becomes apparent that we're talking about that they ran out of materials. Sorry, I have he says something very interesting. It's possible that on Shabbos, until they ran out of materials, they were allowed to carry because they were doing it together or because it was not a biblical prohibition. Now that the materials weren't needed for the Mishkan, they no longer need the materials. Very interesting. So anyways, he has his way of it, but the question is a good question. And he acknowledges our question, which is how would you come to think this is talking about Shabbos? Then he says maybe they were on Shabbos, they were wearing the materials that they were donating because it was a garment. And so so he says maybe it wasn't a biblical prohibition. Anyways, it's more to discuss. The point I wanted to show you is the question. My dear friends, this concludes today's Gemara. We're just at the very beginning of our Gemara's process of discovery and exploration, the reason behind the prohibition, or how do we know that you're not allowed to carry on Shabbos. From there, we will continue on to talk about throwing, passing, and many other very important and fascinating discussions. Dearest friends, I want to thank you all for being here today. Again, barring
Good Chodesh.
Good Chodesh, blessed Chodesh. Everyone should have all the brachas of health and happiness, prosperity, and we should truly hear the sounding of the shofar gadol ASAP. And again, tomorrow, short of an announcement to the contrary, there will not be a Gemara Shir. I'll be in transit for a bris. But again, if something changes, I will give an update. And so either way, I look forward to seeing everyone Wednesday. Thank you all for being here. And I look forward to continuing our new journey through the Talmud. Shkoyach all.
Alan, everything okay?
Shkoyach. Yeah,
Yes,
everything's
Alan,
fine.
it was so wonderful. It's wonderful to have you walk out of the screen and into real life.
It was nice to see you.
Family.
And he's in a building with elevators at work. Fabulous.
Listen, we don't want to rub it in. All right,
Rabbi.
everyone will see you. Oh, yes.
Rabbi, I inherited a bunch of chumishes